In today's video, we will talk about the two wives of the Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II. Their fates at the Austrian court played out very differently, but both of his wives led an unhappy life at his side. In the first part of this video, we will be talking about Isabella of Parma and touch on her suffering from depression. If you feel uncomfortable with this topic, I would advise you to skip to the second part of the video. Isabella of Parma was born on the 31st of December 1741 in Madrid, as the first child of Duke Philip of Parma and Princess Louise Elizabeth of France. Isabella was especially close to her mother, who was only 14 years her senior. Isabel's mother, a daughter of King Louis XV, had great ambitions for her daughter and thus invested heavily in her education. Isabella grew up at the court of her grandfather Philip VI of Spain, which prepared her for the role of a wife to a foreign ruler. From an early age on, it was evident that Isabella would become a great beauty. She was described as mesmerizing with her dark hair and eyes, her slender figure, and her elegant appearance. Besides her good looks, Isabella captivated those around her with her broad intellect. The young princess chose reading and educating herself over chattering and simple entertainment the court offered for young girls. This resulted in Isabella having few friends and confidants, yet she was popular for her kind nature. However, from an early age on, Isabella often appeared to be withdrawn and melancholic, which would last her a lifetime. Despite their close bond, Isabella's mother didn't hesitate to find a suitable groom for her daughter early on. When Empress Maria-Theresia roamed through the European courts to find a suitable wife for her eldest son Archduke Joseph, Louise Elizabeth took the chance to offer her oldest daughter. Eventually, Isabella was chosen and the engagement was announced. The wedding was supposed to take place in 1760, and the Austrian court was rejoicing to finally welcome the new Archduchess. Everyone seemed to be in good spirits about this union, but the groom and the bride. Archduke Joseph, who was described as a good-looking yet awkward and grouchy young man, didn't feel mature enough for marriage, as he hadn't been too fond of women so far in general. His future wife Isabella shared the feeling of reluctance. The highly intelligent woman was an eager writer and often noted her most intimate thoughts. Shortly before leaving for Austria, she noted in her essay, The Fate of Princesses, that the destiny of high-born daughters is the most terrible, as they didn't have a word in it whatsoever. Furthermore, she found it horrifying to leave her home and family for a man she didn't even know, to live at a court that was foreign, solely for the sake of politics. The young princess seemed to be far ahead of her time, but her great intellect and comprehensive view on matters would often fuel her melancholic episodes. As Isabella prepared for a departure to Vienna by bettering her German, she had to endure the loss of her mother in 1759. But there was not much time for mourning, as Isabella was expected to make a grand entrance in Vienna. In September 1760, the 18-year-old girl was married by procuration in Parma before leaving for Vienna. The Austrian nobles were escorting her along the way, and they were smitten by the stunning princess right away, and when the entourage arrived in Austria, so was the future groom. For Archduke Joseph, it must have been love at first sight. The whole Viennese court was charmed by the new Archduchess, and everyone could see that the usually aloof and arrogant Archduke became more gentle and sociable due to his wife's presence. His love for Isabella had no limits, as he wanted her to be by his side all the time, and Joseph seemed to be convinced that his feelings were equally reciprocated. Looking at many of Isabella's essays, that wasn't the case at all. In her essay, Traité sur les hommes, Isabella called men, and I quote, the most unnecessary beings in the world, whose main characteristics are vanity and egocentricity. The consciousness of their inferiority causes them to oppress women. End quote. On the outside, Isabella mimed the perfect Archduchess, but she suffered greatly on the inside. While she was admired by the whole court, she kept everyone at a distance. all but her sister-in-law Marie-Christine. The two women shared a deep bond, even though their characters couldn't differ more. Marie-Christine was a cheerful and simple woman who didn't take great interest in profound entertainment, while Isabel was very melancholic and of a high intellect. The two of them exchanged multiple letters daily, which were filled with love declarations and expressions of deep affection. To put things into perspective, it wasn't unusual for women in that time to write love letters to each other without being romantically involved. It was a common form of communication. However, some historians have attested Isabella and Marie-Christine a romantic affair, which probably didn't involve a physical component though. As there are 200 letters from Isabella to Marie-Christine left, one can decide for themselves. While the whole court took notice of the two archduchesses' intense bond, Joseph was too infatuated to see it. He seemed to love his wife dearly, but he wouldn't comprehend her sufferings or question her well-being. In 1761 his joyfulness became even more intense as Isabella announced her pregnancy. The couple welcomed their daughter Marie-Thérèse in March 1762, and Joseph was over the moon. Even though it was only a girl, he was proud and overjoyed with his wife and his newborn daughter. The whole court was in good spirits, all but Isabella herself. More than ever, the young archduchess was overcome with melancholy. What was called melancholy those days is from a modern perspective oftentimes a case of depression. Most historians have come to the conclusion that Isabella suffered from severe depression. Her mental state worsened over time, especially after suffering 3 miscarriages after the birth of her daughter. The archduchess retracted even more and drowned in her sorrows, while keeping up a brave face for the etiquette. On the inside, though, she was battling with severe suicidal thoughts, which she recorded in a letter to Marie-Christine. In June 1763, Isabella was pregnant yet again, and while everyone around her looked forward to the birth, Isabella became convinced that death was awaiting her soon. When the Viennese court relocated from their summer residence Schönbrunn to the Viennese Hofburg, Isabella said farewell to her chambers, as she was convinced to never see them again. Shortly after her arrival at the imperial palace, Isabella fell ill with a fever, and soon the worst fears came true. The young archduchess had smallpox. A few days later, she came down with her second daughter Christina, who only lived for a few minutes. Isabella's suffering dragged on, all while her desperate husband didn't leave her side. But no one could save Isabella, and on the 27th of November she died in Joseph's arms. The official mourning period at court was set for 3 months, but Joseph's grief would outlast that. After the death of his beloved wife, Joseph went back to his old ways. He maltreated those around him with his derogatory demeanor. While his mother Maria-Theresia was somewhat understanding of his grief, she had to remind him, however, of his dynastic obligations as an heir. To put it bluntly, he had to marry again and reproduce. Joseph wasn't willing to look for a new wife, but he complied to his mother's demands. Many suitable brides were discussed, even the unlucky Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick, who was eventually married to Frederick II of Prussia, who we talked about in my earlier video. In the end, Josepha Maria of Bavaria was chosen, who was the sister of Elector Maximilian III of Bavaria. Joseph found Josepha to be very unattractive and blonde when they first met, but for dynastical reasons, Maria-Theresia found her to be the most suitable choice. Josepha Maria Antonia Walburga was born on the 30th of March 1739 as the youngest daughter of Elector Karl Albrecht of Bavaria and Archduchess Maria Amalia. Josepha lost both her parents during her childhood. The young girl was raised conservatively, and she turned out to be a quiet, insecure young woman. At the time of her engagement she was already 26 years old, which was considered ancient for an unmarried woman. While Josepha felt deeply honored to marry the future Holy Roman Emperor, Joseph was reluctant and expressed his feelings in letters to Philip of Parma. In these letters he noted that Josepha was highly unattractive, but since he had to marry her anyway, he would try to treat her with respect, even though she could never replace Isabella. Poor Josepha seemed to be doomed from the very start. Even though she tried to be as pleasant for Joseph as possible, she didn't stand a chance. Even Maria-Theresia herself called Josepha ugly, gawky, and too servile in a letter to one of her daughters. After the wedding was held in February 1765, Joseph soon forgot his good resolutions to treat her with respect. He lacked any kind of manners towards his wife and avoided her at all costs. As the couple had neighboring apartments in the imperial residence, he had a wall built on their joint balcony so he didn't have to see his wife. Josepha endured these humiliations silently and tried to compensate her lack of charm with her kindness and modesty. However, her qualities weren't acknowledged and she was shunned by the court. The poor archduchess was even sneered at and mocked by some courtiers. This horrible treatment was fueled by the absolute disrespect Archduke Joseph displayed, which would eventually cause his mother Maria-Theresia to intervene and remind her son to respect his wife more, even if it was only for the sake of producing an heir. But Joseph was standing his ground. Today it is believed that the marriage between him and Josepha was never consummated. The cruel treatment of Josepha was so gut-wrenching to some that the royal chamberlain Lady Lyndon resigned from her duties as she couldn't bear it any more. Word of Joseph's behavior towards his wife reached the Bavarian court, where discontent spread. However, Joseph didn't change his ways and went on to stay away from Vienna and consequently from his wife. In 1765, Joseph's father passed away suddenly, one of the only people at court who treated Josepha with respect and dignity. As the new imperial couple, nothing much changed between the two of them. Only the common people would come to love Josepha for her modesty and all her charity work. Her mother-in-law was overcome with bad conscience over time for initiating this unhappy union, and she began to engage more with Josepha, and even ordered her daughters to visit the new empress more often. In May 1767, Josepha started suffering from a high fever, and soon it was determined it was smallpox again. The rest of the royal family was brought away, but it was too late, as Maria-Theresia and Marie-Christine were already infected as well. As the two of them fought for their lives, Empress Josepha succumbed to the disease quickly. She passed away on the 28th of May, 1767, at the age of 28, 2.5 years into her unhappy marriage. Her death almost went unnoticed, as everyone worried about the other sick royal family members. Josepha was laid to rest soon after, without having Joseph attend her funeral. I can't help but feel compassion for Josepha, as I find her fate one of the worst I've read about at the Austrian court. She didn't ask to be bartered away to a man she didn't even know, and who was determined to treat her with nothing but disrespect. Joseph for sure had his sufferings as well, but nothing justifies his extraordinary cruelty towards his innocent wife. Fortunately, he didn't marry again after Josepha's passing and left the continuation of the bloodline to his brother Leopold.